this video we're going to look at a more advanced 2.5D face rig. So I painted up this kind of cartoony little mouse character here, and you'll notice that we've got him facing exactly straight onto the camera with a very neutral, non-emotional expression on his face. And we've placed him in a comp as if we were doing the full body rig here. So imagine a little mouse body with arms and legs down here. We're not going to do the full body, of course, but this would be our main rig comp. And we've already got some controllers set up as well. We have right and left ear controls. We have an eye aim control. And this time we have a head aim control, so we can turn our head around. And we've got the master head control that controls the whole shebang. Now note that there are no other pieces in here aside from the mouse head comp, and all of these parts are all within that pre-comp. So let's just real quick parent up our controllers here. So our right and left ear are both going to be parented to the head, and the eye aim control will be parented to the head aim control. So we want those, as we turn the head, we want the eye controller to go with that. Then of course the head aim control to the head, and the comp itself, we want to parent that also to the head. We can go ahead and lock this up and zero out these controllers here. So let's now go ahead into the head comp here and see what we have set up. So we've got all of our parts separated. We've got the nose, the shadow of the nose actually separate. We've got the eyebrows separated, eyelids and eyes with the pupils inside the eye pre-comp there. Then we have this snout, which is a piece of artwork here, if I just solo that, that creates kind of a bridge to the nose there. That's going to help with our 2.5D rig. Then we have the mouth comp, the base of the head, that's pre-comped for some of the rigging we're going to be doing coming up. And then we have the three little individual hairs sticking up off of his head there. Those are all separated. We have a separate back piece to the head, which will once again help with our parallax illusion. And then we have the right and left ear. I've also got some nulls created here. I've got a controller and a root null for the ears. We'll get to that later on. And then we also have a master head control null here, which is what we're going to use to drive the turning of our head rig. So let's go ahead and parent up these layers so we can start setting up our parallax effect. So pretty much everything is going to get parented to the base of the head here, the main part of the head. And then that's going to get parented to our head controller. That way, if we want to make any changes to the position of the head controller or anything, we can just easily unparent one layer and move that around or change it or do what we want to do. So it'll just give us sort of a little layer of protection there as we're hooking everything up here. So most everything is going to go to this head base with just a couple of small exceptions. So the nose shadow, and the eyebrows, all of those will go to that head base. The eyelids we want to their corresponding eye comps. Then of course the eye comps themselves will be parented to the head base along with the snout and the mouth. And then the hairs and the back of the head, of course, all to the head base as well. And the ears, but not the controller nulls. We're going to leave those for now. And then the head base that all this junk is parented to will parent down to that master head controller. Now in order to get our 2.5D effect, we need to turn most of our layers into 3D layers. We're going to turn all of the layers except our guide up on top there and those null objects, but everything else will be a 3D layer. And then we want to add a camera to the composition. So we're going to add a one-node camera with a nice short lens to get a lot of parallax. And now right away, if we start playing around with the rotation controls here, you can see we have the very rudimentary beginnings of our 2.5D facial rig. Now it doesn't look very good yet. It looks pretty flat, but we just need to separate these layers in Z-space a little bit, and we'll start seeing that cool effect. So I've got a guide here that is turned to a difference blend mode, so things that line up become black essentially, and that'll help us realign the parts as we separate them in Z-space. So let's start by actually bringing pretty much the whole face forward off of the head. So we want the nose shadow, the eyebrows, the eyes, the snout, and the mouth there. And we're just going to bring those all forward. And then, of course, we'll have to realign them using the guide that we've created. But let's bring these forward quite a bit. And even though it looks really crazy right now, we still want to start doing a little testing to see if we're getting a good sense of dimension on that face. And you see, even just by bringing those facial features forward, we start to get that sense of parallax and the face turning in space already starting to work pretty well there. So that whole plane of the face is now forward by 250 pixels. Let's bring the nose and the nose shadow forward some more because we want that nose to really be jutting out. So let's bring it out even like twice as far. Now we're going to have to adjust, of course. Here, let's move it up just a little bit so it's a little more in the position it should be. We'll fix all this in a minute. But what we're trying to get here is, again, that feeling of parallax. And there you can see with that nose forward, that starts to feel a lot more realistic, and we start to really get a sense of that head being dimensional. That, I think, is going to work pretty good. Let's bring the nose shadow up too, and let's just put it just behind the nose. So we're at 540 on the nose. Let's go to 440 for the nose shadow, and we'll have to move that up as well. We'll reposition that in a little bit. Let's also pull the eyebrows forward just a tad so they kind of hang just a little bit over the eyes, giving a little sense of the shape of the eye socket there. And then the eyelids, even though they're parented to the eye comps, let's just bump them just by 1 pixel in front of the eyes. This is a good precaution when you have 2 layers that are occupying exactly the same Z value and you put a 3D camera on them. After Effects is sometimes a bit unpredictable in terms of which of those layers it'll display. Even if one is layered on top of another, it doesn't always show that way when it renders. So just putting a little 1 pixel jump there will make sure that those eyelids will appear over the top of the eyes. And we can close these back up since they're parented in and we don't really want to adjust them any further. Now we can go ahead and turn our guide on, and let's just take each part one by one and get each part realigned. So we'll start with the nose here. And remember, the one thing we don't want to do is adjust the Z space value, but we can adjust everything else. So let's shrink this down so it's the correct size. Okay, we've got that pretty close. And now we'll do the nose shadow. This one's going to be a little bit trickier to see, but we'll try to get that positioned in as best we can. And we can use the scale of the nose here as a pretty good indication for where that scale should be. Okay, I think that's close enough for that shadow. That one doesn't have to be quite so precise. Now, because many of these are occupying the same Z-space position 250, let's get one of these set, and that'll help us know what the scale should be for the others. It'll help us get these others lined up. So let's focus on the mouth here. So 80% scale should be exactly what we want for all of these layers set at -250. And we can probably guess that it's very, very close for the eyebrows as well. Might have to adjust those a little bit, but it's going to be very close to that. Okay, so let's go ahead and line up these other elements. So we've returned our mouse here to his correct appearance, and we have the really nice 2.5D parallax effect starting to work really well for us there. But you can see that we're getting a kind of uncomfortable feeling here as the nose juts out and there's nothing connecting the nose to the forehead here, so it seems like the face is kind of sunken in the middle. So we're going to take the snout comp here and we're going to rotate it so it comes up and meets the nose more like the bridge of the nose would do in real life. So let's try something about like this. Okay, now that's working to give us the kind of parallax we want, but now the shape is interfering here, so we need to adjust that. Now, I've actually already done a little bit of this ahead of time just to speed things along. But if you double click in the snout here, you'll see I've got a mesh warp already on there, and we can just turn that mesh warp on. You can see it just sort of squeezes that nose a little bit. So now it kind of drops back to the size it should be, and we should get a pretty good look there from that parallax. It gives us that sense that the nose is connected to the forehead by that snout. It's a pretty effective illusion. Now it does break down at a certain point. There's always going to be limitations to how far you can push an effect like this. But it's pretty effective for small turns. Alright, now let's work on the back part of the head here. Let's take the 3 hairs here and let's move them back in space a little bit. And with the head back, since we don't have an easy guide here, I'm actually just going to duplicate the layer really quick here, and we'll turn the copy to a difference blend mode here. And then let's take our head back and pull it back in space quite a bit. Let's do about 200 pixels. And then this, of course, we're going to scale up. And then we can delete that copy. And let's realign those hairs too with our guide layer. And these are so simple, I don't think we'll bother with scaling. We'll just get them to be in pretty much the same position they were in. They probably technically would use a little scaling back, but I don't think that's going to affect us very much. And you can see how those little touches start to add to our parallax. As the head turns, the back of the head kind of fills in there, which gives us a little more of that 3D effect. Now the ears, we don't want them to feel like they're sticking out the sides of his head straight. We want them to kind of angle back a little bit to be a little more realistic to the way a mouse would be built. And so what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the orientation on the ears here and set these back a little bit. So about 13 degrees, so we're going to go negative 13 degrees here. And that should get us a nice kind of natural feeling to the way that mouse's head turns and kind of add to our 3D effect by having those ears have some angle to them. So you can see that it's really working quite well. We really get a sense of dimension to the face, and you can look up and down and side to side pretty nicely there. Okay, so let's set up the aim control so we can have an easy, intuitive way to get this guy's head to turn. So we're going to go back to the rig comp here, and we're going to open the position value of the eye aim control, which is zeros, of course. We're going to open the position value for that eye aim control, and we're going to click and drag the timeline for the mouse head comp down below here so we can pick whip to that position value. And because we've got these values zeroed out, this is a pretty easy prospect here. We're going to take the Y rotation value, and that's the Y axis, so that'll have him turn right and left. So we're going to take the X position value, which means it's rotating on the X axis, which means the head looking up and down. And we're going to engage our expressions, and we're going to pick whip to the Y value of the position. Because when we move that controller up and down, we want the head to rotate on the X axis and tilt the head up and down. So we're going to click and drag to there. Then we're going to take the Y rotation value and we're going to pick whip that to the X position value on the aim control. And again, that's rotating on the Y-axis, so that's turning right to left. So we want that driven by the X value of this aim control. Now, because we're translating from position values to rotation values, we're going to need to divide these way down, because if we tried to do this now, the head would like spin 360 degrees just by dragging that controller a little bit. So we know we need to kind of really tone these down. And because I've been through and done some of the trial and error here, we're going to save a little of that trial and error time. I happen to know that what's going to look nice on that X rotation value is going to be dividing it by 20. Now on the Y rotation value, not only do we have to divide it down so it doesn't turn so quickly, we're also going to have to reverse the value entirely, because as it's set up now, if we click and drag the X position up, which would mean we'd be clicking and dragging towards the right, his head would actually turn to the left based on how the rotation values would read that. So we actually have to reverse it. So we're going to divide by minus 30 on the Y rotation value. Now when we go back to our rig comp here, when I click and drag on this controller, you see we get a nice natural sense of aiming the face where that controller is positioned. And it's really quite intuitive and a really nice, easy way to control this little rig. So there you can look around, look down, all around. Works really nice. Now that we have our 2.5D parallax working, let's start to rig up the other parts of the face. And in particular, in this first part, we're going to look at rigging up the mouth so it's a little more expressive than the standard issue replacement rig on a mouth. So we already have a very basic replacement rig in place on the mouth. We have a few different mouth shapes here. Not a whole lot, not enough for full lip sync, but just enough for demonstration purposes and to allow them to make some fun facial expressions here. But we also want to add some rigging so that the jaw can appear to open and close, and the cheeks react as the jaw goes up and down with kind of a squash and stretch effect. So when the chin goes down, the cheeks go in. When the chin goes up, the cheeks go out. But then we also want him to have some emotional range here. So we're also going to add a smile and frown control. And we're going to set this up so the smile and the frown and the jaw opening and closing will all work together along with all four of our different mouth shapes in our mouth selector. So let's take a look inside our mouth comp here. We actually have the mouth pre-composed a couple of times. So let's bring this timeline back into our main timeline window here. And let's take a look at how this mouth is set up. We've got some of the work done for you here. If we double click on the mouth comp, you can see that we've got a couple different pre-comps here. We've got the pre-comp 1. If we double click on that, we have a second pre-comp. And then if I double click on the third one here, inside the third is where we actually have our different mouth shapes down in there. And we're going to start in the next comp up from that comp. And we're going to add a mesh warp onto our layer here. And we're going to go to frame 10 in our timeline. We're going to add a keyframe for our distortion mesh in its neutral state, and we're going to create an animation where at frame 0 it's frowning, at frame 20 it's smiling, and in the middle it's neutral. Now it's really important that we make the mesh warp work with all four of our mouth shapes, and if you have a rig with more mouth shapes, you got to make sure it works with all of those. Now we already have time remapping on this layer because this is where the expression for the mouth selector lives. The time remapping needs to happen here in the pre-comp just above in terms of nesting hierarchy, the final pre-comp with the sequence of mouth shapes. In this case, mouth comp 3. But because I have to quickly switch between the different mouth shapes while I'm working, I'm going to temporarily disable the expression while I'm doing this. We'll just turn it back on when we're done. I'm also going to try to reduce the number of rows and columns, but still allow me to have the control I need over the mouth. I want to have, with the rows, I want to try to have a line that is pretty close to running right through that center point of the mouth. This is probably pretty close and gives me a few less things to work with. If we need to add more, we will. And the columns, we should be able to reduce those down too to maybe, there we go, that works out well. That'll give us a nice amount of control over the shape of this mouth. So I'm going to go ahead and create this animation. We're going to speed through a lot of it because it's very time consuming and fussy. So if you don't want to actually follow along for the mesh warping part of this lesson, just watch along, and at the beginning of the next video, you'll get a project file that already has the mesh warping in place. But if you want to follow along, be prepared to pause the lesson for a while and take your time to get that mesh warping right. And you'll see what I mean when you see me walk through it. Okay, you can see now that we have our mesh warp set up so that each mouth shape will be able to smile and frown. And let's just go ahead and turn the mouth selector expression back on. Now let's go back to our main mouse head comp here. And now we want to go into the head base, and we're going to add a mesh warp to the head base to have the cheeks also smile and frown, to match what's happening with our mouth comp here. So the head base has also got 3 pre-comps, but we're going to be using the first pre-comp for the eyebrow deformation we're going to add. So we're going to go into the second and then into the third, and it's inside this third pre-comp that we'll add our smile and frown mesh warp. Now once again, this is going to take some time because I have to match it to the smile and frown of the mouth, so we're going to have to kind of be jumping back and forth, and it takes a while to get the mesh warp to really work smoothly. So once again, we're going to speed ahead here through this, and we'll pick it up once I've got this set up. Okay, we've now got our smiling and frowning animation now happening on our head base, and we've carefully set it up so it works with the smiling and frowning on the mouth. And of course they're not syncing up now, but we'll get that all sunk up when we add the controllers. And just a quick note, notice that I used the technique of creating a locked composition window so I could see what was happening with the mouth on top of the face while I'm working on that mesh warp on the head here. So I was able to see how the distortions were working together. Alright, now that we've got our smile and frown in place, we need to now add our jaw up and down mesh warping, and we're going to be adding that in the case of the mouth here with this comp. And with the mouth, all we're really going to do is just move the position and do a little squashing and stretching. So we'll just have a little simple squash and stretch animation and maybe a little position shift up and down as that jaw goes up and down. And then in the second pre-comp for the head base, we're going to add another mesh warp, once again creating the kind of squash and stretch of the jaw going up and down. So the jaw will come down, cheeks will go in, jaw comes up, cheeks go out. And just like we had to kind of make sure that our mouth and our face work together. Now we got to make sure the mouth and face work together, but we also have to make sure that the smile and frown works with the jaw up and down. So there's a lot of fuss that has to happen here as we do these mesh warps and other animations, and we have to constantly keep checking to see how it's working with all the different mouth shapes and with the smile and the frown distortions. So again, we're going to speed through this so you don't have to watch me fuss so much, but hopefully you'll get the idea of how you have to set this up. Alright, so we've got all of our mesh warping and our little position and squash and stretch on the mouth finished now for the jaw up and the jaw down animation. Now, as you could probably see even from just watching the time lapse, it's very time consuming and pretty fussy. But once you see how this all comes together, you'll see that it's really worth it because it gives you an incredible range of motion and a face rig that goes way beyond the kind of common 2D facial rig. And you'll get a rig that really starts to take on some really hand-drawn qualities in terms of the level of expression that it's capable of. So let's get these hooked up so we can see. It's going to be a lot easier for me to show you what we can do here once we get it all hooked up. So I'm going to select the main head comp where these controls are, and we're going to lock that up. And note that our mouth selector is actually already working, and don't worry about how weird that looked. We're going to fix that once we get this all hooked up right. So let's start inside the second mouth comp here where we have our smile and frown animation. And we're going to use the awesome Morpher tool, which works a lot like time remapping but doesn't get you into some of the double binds you can get when you're trying to layer multiple time remaps on top of one another. But you can basically take groups of animation, tie them all to a single slider. It also works great for mesh warps and other properties that have no numeric value, and using the Morpher you can suddenly give these non-numeric values a numeric value and tie them into code much more easily. So we're going to go ahead and take our smile frown animation here that's from 0 to 20, select that, create the Morpher, and we always want to name the Morpher right away. And we can actually delete the keyframes there. We don't need those. We just need access to that slider. And then we're going to copy and paste our little translator code that we've been using in order to map our slider from -100 to 100 to our Morpher, which will be 0 to 20. And we just need to pick whip in that slider for the smile and frown. Now let's go to the first mouth comp here, where we have our jaw up and down animation, and we're going to select that, add our Morpher, and again we're going to paste in our code, pick whip to this jaw up and down slider, and then change the spread there from 0 to 20. And now we're going to repeat this exact process with the head base comps. Okay, we've got this all hooked up. It's working really nice. So again, we can raise the jaw and lower the jaw, which kind of looks like chewing with the mouth closed there. We can smile and we can frown, and we can select those 4 different mouths. And what's cool about this is that it'll all work together. So I can pull the jaw up and have him frown, or I can have him smile and have the jaw go up and down. All this stuff will work together, and I can change to different mouth shapes while all this is happening. So this is an incredibly flexible puppet now with an incredible range of expression that can all be really smoothly animated from one pose to another. Really fun rig. Oh, and then on top of all this other coolness, it also all works with our 2.5D rig. So all that smiling and frowning and all that stuff all works with our 2.5D rig as well. So really, really a lot of possibilities for this kind of a rig setup. Now in the next video we'll finish up this rig, and as I said, the project file for the next video will have all this mesh warping done if you don't actually want to take the time to try to get that all sorted out. But if you really want to learn how this process works, then you definitely want to do it and go through the process. It can be tedious, but when you get it to work right, as you can see, it has really, really great benefits. So check out the next video and we'll do the eyes and the ears and finish the rig up.